I started reading research on expertise and skill acquisition and whatnot during my master's and explored it more in my doctorate. It is 1-to-1. If you want to get better at something, you just have to practice it. So no matter what people say, well, Mozart. And it's like, okay, well, did you know that Mozart's dad was like literally the best violin instructor? And he taught his kid from a very young age and was reinforced, and Mozart practiced. And if you look at like Mozart's music from when he was like a really small child to where he was before he died, it's night and day different. It's because he just iterated on it over and over, and he got reinforced like, hey, this is a good thing, and then slowly got better. Like, it's not like Mozart just like woke up and was just like all of a sudden like amazing at something. He had so much training from his dad, so much time spent practicing and getting better, etc. Same thing applies for anybody that you see is doing amazing in any domain. It doesn't matter what it is. The only advantages that you can have like that are innate are like if you're in a sport where there's like a height advantage, like if you are tall, basketball, but in general, you still have to practice. It's not like if I was a 7-foot tall person that all of a sudden I'm going to be in the NBA. It's like, no, I actually got to, practice free throws, etc. Like everything takes practice. So yes, the people who are currently playing on the line might be better than you, but if you invest the time, like using the resources on my website, I promise you can get better. It just takes time. I was genuinely terrible at drumming to the point where just like a quarter note part, it was cut from me because I couldn't play it my freshman year. And then my sophomore year, I was first chair of every ensemble and section leader of the front ensemble. My junior year, I made all-state and drum corps. And then my senior year, I got a full ride in percussion performance scholarship for my undergrad. It was just practice. I've had students, they would often be like, oh, well, you were just like born that way, like always good. And I always had to like be like, no. What you see now is decades worth of practice. What you didn't see is when I was your age, I was genuinely terrible. So if people are way better than you at your instrument or whatever it is that you play, it genuinely just takes practice to get better at it. There are very, very, very few people who are considered to be prodigies at something. I have autism, but autistic savants, savantism, like people who have like calendars memorized for like decades and decades and decades, that is not something that they were born with. They literally just in their head, just repeat it over and over and find more frameworks to help them through something. The same thing for myself with my own playing is I just practice all the time. Even when I didn't have like a pair of sticks with me, I was practicing in my head in classes where I was like, this is boring. I don't want to pay attention to this. I would just drum in my head and I got better that way. The people who are ahead of you at the moment have just currently spent more time on it. And there's literally decades and decades worth of research that supports what I'm talking about. Before I get to the next tip, I just want to say really quickly that you can find literally thousands of hours of free drumming play-alongs and drumming tips in the link at the top of the description or by going into my home tab of YouTube. If you want to be competitive in more than one activity, you're likely going to fail. If you end up splitting your time, let's say 50-50, you're competing against people who will double the amount of time that you're able to spend on one of those activities. This can create some huge discrepancies in performance over time. Erickson et al. Showing over time the skill level and the amount of practice. Educators, which they're actually lower than some of the good and best students, and one of the reasons why is because they're spending their time not only learning how to perform, but they're also spending their time learning how to teach, so that takes away from the time practicing. But then there's also a huge discrepancy between like the good students than the professionals, and that has to do with the amount of time practicing. The professionals practiced over 30 hours on average a week, whereas the teachers were practicing only about 10 hours. So if you are the kind of person who is splitting your time between drumline and something else, you are going to end up in this category because of time. You just simply won't have enough time to be able to practice as much as the people who are the professionals who are able to put in more effort over an extended period of time. This is all backed by decades and decades and decades of research that says if you want to get better at something, you have to invest more time. And it's not just the amount of time, but it's also focusing on the right things in an effective or efficient way. If you're splitting your time between two different activities, you're just not going to get the hours in as much as somebody else who is just dedicating their time to that. That's backed by research, and that's what I've seen in the decades that I've been teaching with literally thousands of students across every single grade, kindergarten through doctoral student. It all comes down to time and consistent effort. How do you get into a higher level group like a drumline when your drumline is not very good? First thing that you need to do is you need access to resources, and the second thing that you need is you need to have a long enough runway, so a long enough time to be able to work on things to improve, to be able to make it into that higher caliber group. One of the things you can do is get lessons from the staff or alumni. This can make it so that you can get feedback on specifically what to focus on and get into the little nuances of technique that you might not actually see or or be able to notice just by watching like lot clips or taking a look at like the packet, etc. Another thing you can actually do is to get some feedback from people online. Post like a video where it just shows your hands playing and be like, hey, can I get some feedback? You might get some vets in that ensemble who would be able to give you some feedback there. But the problem with getting feedback like that from just random people online, some people are confidently ignorant in what they're talking about. So they might communicate something like, oh, you absolutely have to do X, Y, and Z, but they actually have no idea what they're talking about. So sometimes people are really good at explaining things, but they don't actually know how to perform. Take it with a grain of salt. Even somebody like myself, even though I have many awards as a performer, as an educator, as a scholar, PhD, music education, blah, 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 blah. What I will teach you might be different from what somebody else will teach you, and that's just the normal part of the process. So no matter who it's coming from, take it with a grain of salt. Even if it's a really good, highly qualified performer and educator, they might teach you an approach that is different than the group that you're auditioning for. Another thing that you can do is you can actually attend rehearsals or sectionals and watch the rehearsals or sectional clips. So for example, when I wanted to get into a university that I went to, I would actually, my senior year, go to the rehearsals in the evening and watch to see how they were rehearsing. I would then go and chop out with some of them after rehearsals. And then I would also attend some of the sectionals because I knew some of the snare drummers on the line because I marched with them in DCI when I was in high school. And so I was getting all sorts of feedback just by watching them and then also being able to drum with them like in sectionals and then after rehearsals because I was attending that. So you don't actually have to pay for that when doing that. Another thing that you can do is really focus on the daily efforts with not only what you are practicing, but how you are practicing. So I've got a ton of videos like in the drumming tips section down here that talk specifically about how I recommend practicing a certain amount of time on your technique, a certain amount on like grid variations, and a certain amount on chops. So like 50 to 60% of your time should be on the technique. 30 to 40%-ish should be on like grid variations, and then the rest of the time, 10 to 20% should be on chop exercises. Don't focus on just like playing cool licks or playing chop exercises or shopping sprees, blah, 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 blah. Instead, what you need to focus on is the stuff that's going to progress you. So these exercises, the grid variations, which help you improve rudiments, or the technique exercises, which help you improve like your rolls or your flams or whatever, your timing, all sorts of things like that. Focus on that rather than focus on the fun stuff. It is quite the grind to actually work on practicing over an extended period of time. If you give yourself a long enough runway and you have enough of these resources, like the thousands of free exercises on here, and you get some feedback, whether it's from alumni or staff or from people online who actually know what they're talking about in the context you're trying to work on, that can have a significant improvement in your playing over time, even if you're on an ensemble that is not very good at the moment. And then ideally you can teach the people that you're working with so they slowly get better, and then everybody is happy and kumbaya, blah, blah, blah. Another thing you can do is you can just ask me questions on YouTube, whether it's in a live stream like right now, or if you are in the comments section on any of these play-alongs or any of the drumming tips videos, etc., you can leave a comment on here, and I will often take those questions and I will turn it into something I talk about in the live streams. It doesn't matter how fast you can play if everything you play is inconsistent. So the most important thing to focus on if you want to make a top-tier drum line is your consistency. That way it's easier to correct, like, hey, this one specific diddle is slurred out or rushed or whatever, as opposed to, well, this time you played it, it was slurred. The next time you played it, it was rushed. And then it was proper interpretation. So it's like rolling the dice, like your D20, and to see which one is it going to be this time. What you want is that consistency. There's no RNG with your playing. You want to have it so that every time you play something, it sounds the same